Hi, I'm Cindy Pope. I'm here at the Cool Tools Studio to introduce you to the Silhouette Curio for cutting metal clay. We're going to make some beautiful fold-over earrings using FS 999, and I'm going to show you how to cut them and construct them and design them. Okay, so let me show you the tools we're going to use. The first thing you need is a curio, and here is the curio. It's a die cutting machine that hooks up to a computer where you've designed your earrings, and I'm going to show you how to do that design. In the curio kit that Cool Tools sells, you have protective film, a little dust brush, which is really important, and a rubber roller and a tissue blade, and you need some scissors. I like these Joyce Chen scissors. They can be used to cut metal clay, they cut sheet metal, they cut leather, and they cut paper. They're really fabulous. And I wanted to show you again the earrings that we're making. We're making this one. You can also put patterns on them, but it takes quite a bit of time to teach you that, and I do have classes on Craftcast where I put patterns on almost everything, but I think the silver is really beautiful, and it's really nice without the pattern, so this is the design I'm going to show you. Your design will not be exactly like this. That's the beauty of the curio, because when you design, each one is a little bit different, so they're one of a kind. We're going to need 3-card clay rolled from FS 999. You can also use Easy 960, and the shape needs to be exactly the size that we made in the design, and I'm going to show you how it cuts. Okay, we're going to get ready to cut and etch our clay, so I'm going to show you exactly how I set it up. I pulled the tray out of the machine. I'm going to take my protective film, which I ordered in a 5-foot length from Cool Tools. And I'm going to cut a piece that is about 3 times as big as this. This does 2 things. The clay will stick to it, but then also it'll catch any dust, which we can reuse then. On the screen, I have my design 2 grids over and 1 grid down. It needs to go in exactly the same place on the mat. That's how this all works. I'm going to take and put protective film on all sides of that because I don't want to get any dust on my mat. You will, as you work, get some dust on your mat, but the least amount as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to burnish it on. And then I'm going to pull this paper backing up, and I'll be left with a sticky protective film. Be very careful when you pull it up that the protective film actually gets on the mat. I've had some students where it's stuck to this, and so they don't realize they don't have anything in the mat. So make sure you're only pulling the paper off. Then I'm going to take and reassess the size of this to make sure it's big enough. Compare that to my screen. And so it's 65 millimeters by 60, and I know that's larger than my design and the box I have in the screen, and I'm going to put it right up in the corner. If you don't put it in the corner here and it's in the corner on your computer, it's not going to cut in the right place. You just need to mirror exactly what's on the computer screen. And then I take this roller and burnish it on. This is very strong clay, so you're not going to crack it. And now we're going to go ahead and load it into the curio. We're going to push it past the notch and hit the load unload button. And we're ready to go to the computer, and I'll help you set up the file for printing. So we're going to start out with drawing using the left-hand drawing tools. We're also going to use a couple icons. Since some of you are beginners, I'm going to show you a very simple way to learn the software. I'm going to just do a few little menus that are going to help you. So we're going to use the modify icon, and what we can do, we can open up the little menu and pull it off to the side so it'll always be available for us. We're also going to use the replicate option, and when we pull it down, we can click them together and they'll always be right there for us. And I think that's the only ones we're going to be using for this. We're not going to put a pattern in it. It's a little more complicated than the time allows for this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I do this. I'm going to use the knife tool and the drawing tool, and I'm going to use the knife tool in a very unusual way. Let's go ahead and draw a rectangle. I'm going to thicken up the lines for this so you can actually see it better for the purposes of the video. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and choose the knife. And the knife is very interesting. Up at the top, you'll see all the different options. We're going to choose solid because we are going to slice through this. We want a line where we slice through. If we only wanted to break it apart, we would use outline. And because we have the designer version of the software, we're going to choose wave. And it's a beautiful tool that allows us to do a wave. And we're going to uncheck auto apply. That's going to give us time to mess around with the cut before we actually apply it. So let's go ahead about 2/3 of the way over and draw a wave. And we're going to zoom in a tiny bit. And hopefully you can see this little slider. We want to slide it so there's only one big curve. Remember, our earring has an outside curve. So I'm wanting to have one big curve, and then I'm going to click on the line, and you'll see these little white dots. Oops. These little white dots, they're going to let me make it fatter. And I want a nice curvy curve to my earrings. At this point, I can actually pull it down a little bit and spread it out. Using that other white box. So I give myself a nice pretty curve. I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to hit apply. And as soon as I hit apply, you'll see it cuts a line, and here is the outside shape of our earring. But I'm going to do something very interesting that the software lets us do. I'm going to use this other half to create the inside. So I'm going to move it over, and that's pretty good. But you can see when we zoom out a little bit with these earrings, the inside is a different curve than the outside. So we're going to go ahead and play with that a little bit. And the way I'm going to do it is I am going to take that drag box, remember the little white box I just showed you, and I'm going to make the curve different. And then I'm going to move it over. And that's pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a drag box, and when you do a drag box over something, as soon as it touches a shape, it's going to select it. And then I'm going to open up the modify window, and I'm going to choose intersect. And it's going to, it'll give you a little description there. It's going to take the parts of both the shapes that overlap each other. So there we go, and I'm pretty happy with my curve. But I don't really need this part up at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the knife and I'm going to draw a line through about the middle of this first curve. If you were not putting a stone in it, you could certainly put it a little bit lower. And you'll see when we construct how that works. So at this point, I'm going to choose solid again, but I don't want a wave. I want a straight line. So I'm going to choose straight. And I'm just going to slice through. And I'm going to hit apply. And it just cut that top off. And then what I want to do is I'm going to slice through the center because my shape needs to be symmetrical for the way we're designing this. And so I'm going to just cut this off and then make the shape symmetrical. And I love making my shape symmetrical in the Silhouette software. So, but I don't want a line where I'm going to cut. I want an outline. I want to just break it apart. I want to be straight again. And so I am going to take and draw a line through the center. I'm going to hit apply, and you can see it just broke it apart. It did not draw a line. I'm going to save this one in case I'm not happy with what I did with this one. I'm going to delete the part I cut off. And now I'm going to use the replicate window, which is the other icon we have in our little menu. And I'm going to mirror below. You have to have it selected. Mirror below. Then I'm going to draw a drag box around both of them so they're both selected. And I'm going to do something called Object, Make Compound Path. What I'm doing is I'm telling the software it's one complete shape. But we're going to do something called point editing because I want you to see there's a little bit of a problem with the shape when we do it this way. there's some broken points. Remember, we were joining two halves together, so those still have the place where I sliced. There's a nice little tool in the Silhouette software where when you see those points, if you just click on them, they'll join up to each other. So when I double click, there's no more red points. And now is when I'm going to check and make sure I'm happy with the shape. I also want to adjust the size. I want this to be about 1 1/2 inches when I'm done. So I'm going to stretch it down a little bit, stretch it across a little bit. And this, the clay shrinks about 10%. So I'm going to go about 1 3/4. And now I'm going to go back to that replicate window, which is still open. I'm going to mirror to the left. And then I'm going to put these over each other and say, do I like the shape? And I do. I'm pretty happy with that. It's got room for a stone here, which is good. And it's going to have an ear wire up at the top. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the stone part. So I need to line them right up. And then I am going to go to the control panel, which has something called a alignment window. And I'm going to line these middle because I want them to be right in the same place, up and down. Sometimes they'll move the tiniest bit, but you do always want to do that. Once I've done that, I'm going to group them because I need to group them to center the stone in here. So I can delete this other part, and I'm going to draw a circle that is 3 millimeters. I'm going to fill it with purple because the 3 millimeter stones at Cool Tools are 3 millimeters are purple. And I'm going to change the size to 3 millimeters, and I'm just going to make sure it's going to fit pretty well. I need to have at least a millimeter or two, probably 2 millimeters to the right and left of the stone and up and down. And that's 1.88. I think that's going to work well. If the edge here is too thin, you're likely to have problems in constructing and potential problems in firing. So I just like to give myself a little bit of room, which is why I use this tiny stone. Okay, once I'm sure it's going to work, I'm going to create a new shape that's going to be cut out, and I'm going to tell you how it works. When I use cabs, and this is a little teeny tiny faceted cab that Cool Tool has, I love them. When I use them, I use a special method of cutting a hole slightly smaller than the cab and trapping the cab in there so the stone will not fall out. And those of you that set small stones know they're pretty tricky to set so they don't fall out, but you don't want them like set way deep in. And these cabs are a perfect option, and they're really, really pretty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and make a little hole that is 0.25 millimeters smaller than the stone. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to remove the color, and the one with the color is the true size. And then I'm going to change the size of it up here at the top in the great little command bar that lets me do all kinds of things. Okay, so now it's 2.75. I'm going to figure out exactly where I want it to be, and the place I'm going to choose is the place where it has the most clay room on all sides. And then I'm going to draw a drag box around it, and I'm going to choose Align Center. So it's going to put it right in the center, and it moved the tiniest little bit. And you can barely see it, but it really makes a difference. And then I'm going to ungroup these. I'm going to choose one of the sides. I'm going to hit the Shift key, and I'm going to choose the circle. And I am going to duplicate it. We'll bring it down here. I'm going to regroup these guys. And I'm going to put them off to the left because when I've done all the work to create that shape, if I ever have to go backwards, I want to have it available. So now I'm going to work with this one. I am going to delete that oops. We are going to ungroup this. We're going to delete this extra shape. And I'm going to group this together. So our piece is ready, but we need 4 of them. So I am going to, and I'm also going to want to have some little cutout holes in the body of it. So I'm going to actually create those now, and they don't have to be circles. I think circles are pretty easy. And again, you don't want them to be too close to the edge. And the way I'm going to make this is I'm going to make it so you'll see when we actually cut it, the holes are going to be different on each side. They'll be flipped. I am centering them by hand. I'm going to ungroup, and I'm going to make those a compound pass. And then I'm going to group them with this other red cutout. We don't ever want to move that circle, because remember we centered it, so that stone is going to be right in the center. So I'm going to group this, and now I'm going to go back to the replicate window, which is already open. I'm going to make 4 copies, because that's what we need for this. But we need 4 copies, but we don't need 4 cutouts. We only need 2 cutouts, because only two of them have an opening on the top for the stone. So on 2 of them, I'm going to ungroup, and I'm actually going to change this cutout to blue. And we're going to etch it a little bit, and the reason we're going to do that is it'll give us a place to set our stone when we're constructing. It'll make the construction a little bit easier. I'm going to take this one, and we are going to ungroup and change this to blue. And blue is my color for etching, and that's the only etching we're going to be doing on these earrings. So I'm going to group each one with its little blue circle. Okay, so now we're ready to go, and we just need to figure out how big our clay needs to be. I'm going to zoom these up next to each other. And I'm going to draw a little square. And that square is going to be brown, because I always make the colors of the squares that represent the size of the clay brown. And then I'm just going to fits with it a little bit to see how close I can get. Now with silver, I get a little bit closer, but you don't ever want it to go off. So, and I'm going to roll this clay in the clay rolling video. So we want 54, and I can make these closer. This is 3-card clay. It's going to cut really beautifully. If you were using Easy 960, you could do 2.5 or 2 cards, because it's much stronger. With fine silver, I'm using 3 cards, but they're still fairly lightweight for an earring this large. Okay, so I'm ready to go. I am going to group this together, and then I'm going to show you how to set it up to cut. Okay, we've got everything done. The only thing we need to do is shut down our menu, because we're not going to need that anymore. And we're going to take and move everything off the screen except for what we need cut. So we're going to take any titles, our little extra piece off, and this one we're going to actually go ahead and put the brown box, which represents the clay, right in the corner of the grid. You want to figure out a consistent place to put yours. I always put mine at 2 over and 1 down. We're going to roll our clay and dry our clay, and we're going to remeasure it, because if our clay is smaller than these dimensions, we can still adjust the size of the earrings, but you don't want to not measure it that second time and check it. So, and you want to make sure that this brown corner is right in the right place. Oftentimes students get it off a little bit, and that'll cause you to go off the edge. I've given myself a little extra room. You can also do some little extra cutouts and bezels in these open spaces. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to go to the Send tab. We'll choose Send. And when you choose Send, the first screen you'll get is all colored. It's all red colored. And that's not what we want. We want to do cut by line color, because we have designed this whole program to use different colors. First thing we want to do is we want to uncheck the brown, because we don't ever use that except for to determine the size our clay needs to be. The Curio always will cut in exactly the same place as you put it on the screen. Then I'm going to uncheck the red and uncheck the black. So only blue is checked, and then I'm going to always first thing, change the blue to the right hand holder. We're always going to put our etcher in the right hand holder. So I use blue and green for etching. So whenever I see blue and green on the screen, I want to immediately go into tool number and click on tool number 2. The blade will be in the left hand holder, and we're just going to leave that where it is. So what we're going to do at this point is we want to set the settings, because it's got all kinds of settings in here, but we want to use the ones that we put in that work for metal clay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here where it says cut, where it's red, and I'm going to choose cut 3-card clay. I'm going to assess the thickness of my clay, because if it ends up being 3.5 or 4, you can either sand it down or you can go ahead and just use the blade higher. So we're going to choose cut 3-card clay, and then we're going to look down here and make sure it says what your user-defined settings are that I gave you. So you want to make sure it matches your list. We can sometimes make mistakes when we're entering. The other one we want to change is the etch one. And we're going to say etch, probably etch 5, because this is just a teeny tiny little 1-line etch. So let's find etch 5. And etch 5 should always have an action of etch. The biggest problem people have on the etchings is they say cut, and cut moves in a very different way, so it'll look jaggedy and not precise. So you always want to make sure it says etch, and I'll emphasize that during the user-defined settings video. So we're going to change it to etch, and we want to make sure it says speed of 10, force of 5, and we're going to have, it should be 2 passes, no, 1 pass. So we have put our clay on the mat, on the protective film, and now we just need to put our blade in. We want to set the blade to 8 or 9. I'm going to go with 9, so I get it cut all the way through. The little red line is on the 9, and remember the fin always needs to be forward. And you need to turn it all the way to the right and lock it into place. We're also going to etch a little circle using the etching tool. And we're ready to go ahead and hit send to the silhouette. It's going to etch the little circle. And it knows exactly where to go. And I can see it, so I don't really need to send it again. So now I'm going to do the cutting, and I always do them separately because I like to look at the etch and see if I want to send it again. Once it's done its etching, we're going to uncheck, check the red, and red will light up over here, and we're going to send to the silhouette. And it cuts it much better than I could do by hand. And it cuts very quickly and very precisely. What I do with a flex clay, and you would never do this with a non-flex clay, is I pull up the edge to make sure it cut all the way through. And if it hadn't cut all the way through, I would go ahead and send it again. At this point, I'm going to hit the middle button to eject. And you want to find a flat surface to remove this on. I often use my Curio because it's the nearest flat surface. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and remember the first time you use a mat, it's really sticky. So this one is stickier than it will be after about 3 uses. It will not be this sticky. But I will pull up the protective film all the way around. up to the edge of the clay. And it gets easier every time you do it because you're just pulling a little bit of sticky off that curio mat, enough so it's not quite as tacky. Then you're going to take your tissue blade. Be careful because tissue blades can be dangerous. I usually cut myself when I do that. And you can see I've angled it and I'm holding on both sides, and I'm going to go nice and slow and just pull that protective film up. You want to go slow because you don't want to skip and hurt the clay. And again, this also goes much quicker once you've got a less sticky mat. Okay, so we pulled it off the mat and we're going to turn it upside down, and then we are going to peel back this protective film. And if you see the piece coming up, try to get it back down. This one actually, I think, still has protective film on the back. Oh, no, it doesn't. Sometimes you'll get protective film on the back. If you do, you'll just take the tissue blade and slice it off. So the little dots didn't come out, but I'm just going to use a scalpel and just poke them out. And you can save those to use those in another project. So this cuts like a dream. And with the new cutters that Cool Tools has, you can get a cut this precise. So I'm just going to pop out the holes using this scalpel. They come out very easily. If your clay was 4 cards, you might have an issue, which is why we want to really make sure we're rolling true to card thickness. And then I'm going to continue and take the holes out of both of these, and then we'll construct the earrings. Okay, we're ready to do the construction. I'm going to show you a couple new tools we'll be using. I'll be using a heating surface, and you can also use your dehydrator, but I like this because it dries quicker. I'm going to use a little tile to construct on and to make slip on. I have these little containers where you can have extra bits to make slip. And I always have 2 because I'm going to take these little cutouts that I'm going to save to use in another project, and I'm going to put them over in this container. And anytime you need a little circle, you won't need to make it now. I'm going to use a sanding sponge. I'm going to show you how I drill my earring holes, and I use a little 6mm bezel, stone bezel cutter. And we're going to need 2 of these little tiny 3mm CZs. And remember, we cut our hole 2 3/4 inches big, so this is going to be trapped inside. I'm also going to show you these little micro applicators that I use that Cool Tools has for sale. I love in particular this one. It has a nap at the end that will bring up slip as we use it, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And we also need ball burrs to do our hole. Okay, now we are going to put the pieces together now that we've figured out our placement. First, I'm going to make sure that the stone fits in there nicely. And it's pretty close, but when I put the clay over it, I want it to be flat. And this is one of the things I use for this stone setting burr for. Basically, I'm just going to bevel this inside edge, so it's going to go over that dome. I put it on the top, but I'm not really removing material, I'm just removing dust. And now I'm going to put it over, and it fits pretty closely. I'm going to do it one more time. The point is to bevel the underneath and not affect the front, because you want a nice clean setting. So there we go. So now we've made sure our stone fits. We're going to wet both sides so they have a little bit of slip. And then with these tiny stones, I really like to put them on with tweezers. We're going to put it over, and then I'm going to pick it up and make sure both sides fit properly. It's not a huge deal because you can sand it, but it is cut perfectly. So at this point, I'm going to take a little bit of that water and I am going to just smooth these sides together. What it's doing is it's kind of making the join better. But every time I do a connection like this, I'm going to go over it 1 or at least 2 times, maybe 3, because I don't like things coming apart in the kiln. So now that we've got it set and joined and I've added a little pressure, I'm going to put it on the heating surface. Once this heats, I'm going to reinforce. And now I'm going to go ahead and put the other one together. Okay, now that this piece is dry, I'm going to join the top. So I'm going to hold it in the bottom as I flip the top over. I'm going to do the same thing. It's much easier now because I don't have a stone. But again, I'm using the same process to bring up some slip on both sides. And then I'm going to add pressure because that helps it join better. I'm also going to reinforce this one because it needs to be reinforced at least 1 or 2 times. And I'll tell you a good general rule. You want to reinforce, and I'll sand next time, until you can no longer see where the 2 pieces go together. So your goal is to have it reinforced enough so it looks like one piece. And you won't be able to see that. And when it's fired, you won't be able to see it, which you don't want either. And this little brush actually is pushing slip down into that. Okay, so we've reinforced and we're going to dry both sides. We'll reinforce each of these 1 more time and then we'll drill holes. Okay, so I've dried these both and I've reinforced the top and the sides, and I've also reinforced in between this edge. If these edges are well joined, it's also going to make it fire more consistently. Once you've got it all done, you want to do your refining and finishing up. And we're going to put the hole in and then we're going to clean up our bezel. And you can see that the line is gone. So we're ready to fire because you can't see that join. Okay, I'm going to show you a really fun thing. I like to use this bezel and the little ball burrs to do my earring holes. You don't want your hole to get too close to the top. You can go higher if you're using Easy 960, but I want to err on the side of caution. And I start with a little, this is the 3rd smallest burr. And your goal is you want an earring ear wire to fit through it. So I'm going to clean that up, and then at this point, I put these back to back and I'm going to drill through to make a mark so that they're in exactly the same place. And that's going to be a little bit small for some ear wires, so I'm going to go up to the next size. And even if you want it bigger, you want to start with a smaller hole. This clay is pretty strong and you're probably not going to have a problem. It's not going to be compromised by drilling. But I do always start with a smaller one. And this looks really nice, but I want to show you something that's going to add a little more professional look, and it's also going to make your ear wire move nicer. You're going to take this ball burr and we are going to bevel up the edge. And it just looks prettier. You can also do the same thing with these holes. It'll make them look slightly more organic. And so now our hole looks much better. I'm going to do that with the other one, but first I'm going to clean up this bezel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put some water around here. As I was setting it, some of the slip got out and it doesn't look completely round, and you really want it to look nice and neat. The other one actually looks better. And this is straight water. You don't want any clay in it. I'm going to use this little applicator. And I'm just going to pull up that extra clay till it's nice and round. We can also use our Princeton brush, which is a little teeny tiny brush that is wonderful for doing, I do a lot of small pieces. My 26-year-old daughter says small is in with millennials. So I'm just cleaning that up. I'm going to dry it, and then you should clean the stone with alcohol or some kind of water. Sometimes do it. You just want to look really, really close. Make sure there's no pieces of silver on there because they will fire right on, and you won't be able to clean it up afterwards. We'll do the same thing with this one, and we're going to put it in the kiln. So here are FS999 Curio cut earrings with a tiny CZ set in them. I hope you give it a try and enjoy using the Curio.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.